Okay, today we are working on CO2. I can write rational numbers as both fractions and decimals. So in addition to knowing the categories of our number system that we talked about yesterday with the irrational, rational, integer, whole numbers, it's also important to be able to write values various ways. For example, sometimes a value is better understood as a decimal. So we would want to say $2.75 instead of saying 11/4. Sometimes as a fraction, we need 3/8 of a cup of sugar instead of saying we need 375 thousandths of a cup. So it depends on how we're using these numbers as to which way we want it as. Do we want it as a decimal or do we want it as a fraction? So today we're going to learn about converting. Converting from fractions to decimals, converting from decimals back to the fraction. So to convert is to write a value in a different way. To write a value a different way. Integers to fractions and decimals. An integer defined as a non-fraction and non-decimal can still be written as a fraction and a decimal by writing the integer as a numerator over a denominator of 1, or writing the integer with a decimal point followed by a 0. So let's say we have a 4, that is our integer. We want to write it as a fraction. We'd write it as 4/1. If we want to write it as a decimal, we would write 4.010. Same thing for those negative integers. So if we have -9, we'd write it as -9/1 or a -9.0. All right, so let's scroll up. Fractions to decimals. So now we get a fraction and we want to convert that. So if we have 4/5, we want to make it to a decimal. So we are going to want to write the equivalent fraction with the denominator of 100. The numerator is the decimal. So we want to make our denominator 100. To go from 5 to 100, we multiply by 20. Whatever we do to the bottom, we do to the top. Whatever you do to the denominator, you do to the numerator. So 5 times 20, we want to do 4 times 20. 80 hundredths. And then we can change that 80 hundredths into our decimal. So we know that this is 80 hundredths, and that's the same way we say the fraction of 80 hundredths. And
or it could just be, 0.8.
Good. But in order to go from here to here, we went with the hundredths. Sometimes people might look at that and say, could I say 4/5 and I want to go to 10 because I know 5 is a multiple of 10. In order to go from 5 to 10, we're going to multiply it by 2. 2 times 4 is 8, so that is 8/10. It's the same value. It's a different amount because one's the tenths and one's the hundredths. Okay. We can also look at if we have a mixed number, we have 1 and 1/4. Oops. There's different ways we could do that whole number. So we could turn it into an improper fraction. So multiplying the denominator times that whole number plus the numerator. So 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5. And then we want to get our denominator of 100. Here it wouldn't work to put it as a tenth because 4 doesn't go into tenths. We want to go up to that 100. To go from 4 to 100, we multiply by 25. 5 times 25 is 125. So that's 125 hundredths. So we know it would be 100 with 25 hundredths. We could also say, hey, what about if I take that whole number and I put it as my whole number, and then I just work with my fraction. So I have my 1/4 going to 100, I multiply it by 25, and I say it's 25 hundredths. So I put that after my decimal. Both ways, we get the same answer. We've been talking about how there's different ways of doing math to get the same answer. Do which way works for you. Do you want to go from the mixed number to improper and solve it that way? Or do you want to just carry that whole number over and work with your decimal, with that fraction to the decimal? Ellen?
You can also just divide the numerator by the denominator.
Yes. You're correct. For this one, that works that way. Yep. All right, so decimal to fraction. With the decimal out to the hundredths place, write the decimal as a numerator of a fraction with a denominator of 100. Simplify if necessary. So if we have a decimal of 36 hundredths, we're going to put that 36 as the numerator. And we said hundredths, so it's over 100. That can be simplified. Just looking at that ones place, I see 2 even numbers. I know I can divide a 2 out. I might be able to find a greater common factor that I could divide out. I can actually divide a 4 out of both 36 and 100. 36 divided by 4 is 9. 100 divided by 4 is 25. What if I have 4/10? We want to just be in the habit of making that decimal go out to the hundreds. I'm going to change that 4/10 into 40 hundredths. So I can do 40 hundredths as a fraction. And I'm going to simplify. I can divide a 20. That is my greatest common factor. I can divide that by 20. 40 divided by 20 equals 2. 100 divided by 20 equals 5. Cool.
Or you could have done it from the start.
For this one,
Yeah.
what would I put it over? If I want to just work with 4/10, what would that look like?
You just have to do it for, maybe you just have to do the two this.
What am I gonna change from if I don't put it as the hundredths and say 40 hundredths?
You do 400 and then 1,000.
No, because this isn't 4 hundredths. So what would I put as my denominator? If it's 4/10.
40.
I think Paisley knows. Paisley?
4/10.
Yeah, if it's 4/10, I would put a 10 under it. And then 4/10 simplified, I could divide that 2 out, and I would get that same 2/5 answer. Oops. Mr. Schultz has in here to always put the denominator of 100. It's a good habit to get into. So that, and then you simplify from there. You will not be able to use a calculator on this section in the test, But as we're going through this, you can use that calculator to double check your work. Okay, but when we get to the test, you need to be able to do the math. So practice doing the math now, so that way we don't have to worry about it when we get to the test. How do I do the math? All right, let me stop the recording.